My name is Sue DelBianco, and I'm a local historian. And
Camera's over
today
here. Oh, the camera's over
I'm
here.
about to tell you a story about a railroad that ran from Bridgeport through Trumbull, Newtown, Danbury, Brookfield, Canaan, and all the way eventually to Pittsfield, Massachusetts. Now, what I wanted to tell everyone is that history is just not a study of the past, but it is an understanding of the present. So, this is how things get evolved, where there was once a railroad, and now today it has become one of Connecticut's best biking, hiking, and recreational trails called Rails to Trails, a conservatory program all over the United States to preserve abandoned railroad corridors. Now let's start off with Bridgeport in 1836. The railroad came into fruition. The city was completely opposed to it. They had to raise bonds to get the money for the railroad, and they did. And it started in Bridgeport on Water Street. There was an old train station down there, two of them. They burnt down to the ground, the last one, 1978. As that went on, many railroad stations were springing up in the United States, including this area. So the connections after Bridgeport was Trumbull. They had two railroad stations in Trumbull, the Trumbull Station and the Long Hill Depot. Now, railroad was a recurring nightmare in the United States at this time in about 1856. There were numerous wrecks. And because it was an experiment at the time, railroad was just an experiment, numerous wrecks happened because of misread signals, and they didn't have the sophistication or the technology to actually read signals like they do today with, electrification. So people took their chances going on the trains. Now, Bridgeport train station was very, very beautiful. And it was a great edifice, and it was built by Warren Briggs. And all these train stations gave the illusion of peace and tranquility. They had artwork in them, they had mosaics in them, they had marble and terrazzo flooring. But a lot of times people would get on the trains from the station not knowing what was ahead of them on the tracks. Anyway, as railroad evolved, and the reason the railroad came into being is because of manifest destination. Railroads were springing up all over the United States, and it was a faster mode of transportation than the horse and buggy. And at first, the farmers up in Trumbull, up in Newtown, were very opposed to the railroad because it was just a big, monstering, belching locomotive, and it made noise, and it scared the livestock. And then the farmers realized that they can transport their milk and other goods to different markets at a faster mode of transportation. So, hence, the railroad became actually something that kind of like linked the communities, and it improved industry. It brought industry alive in the farmlands. Now, there was at one time in Trumbull, they had 57 dairy farms, and it was all milk. And that's what the Housatonic Railroad, which it was called, it was formed in 1836, and it ran all the way up until 1878. And then it became the New York, New Haven, and Hartford Railroad. And that ran up until, like, say, the 60s, and then it became Conrail eventually. And eventually, the railroad did go out in 1942 up in Trumbull because they were no longer pulling freight up there. The passenger service went out in 1932. The reason that they were not pulling freight anymore was because the railroad was taken over by trucks. Yes, refrigerated trucks. Another big business up there in those areas was ice harvesting. In the Trumbull Valley, they had a 98-gallon reservoir up there. And they would take the ice blocks, put them on the train, and bring them to different markets. And it was quite lucrative. A very labor-intensive job ice harvesting was. They would have to take their saws and go down into the water and bring out these big blocks of ice and put them in the Trumbull Ice House. And they also had the Katz's Ice House as well. And they had to go down into Bridgeport, and people would place like little placards up in their windows, whether they wanted 5 pounds of ice or 10 pounds of ice or 15 pounds of ice. And the iceman would cut the ice according to spec. Now, what eventually happened in the early 70s was the railroad became abandoned completely. There were tracks up there until in the 60s. And then Route 25 came in. Route 25 came in from downtown Bridgeport, made its way through the banks of Beardsley Park, went all the way down Quarry Road in Trumbull, where the movie theaters are presently, AMC, made their way behind Reservoir Avenue. Then it went across Churchill Road into the Trumbull Valley, and then made its way completely through there. Then it went into Stepney. Then it went into Brookfield, Danbury. There's train tunnels up there in Newtown. There's 2 big giant train tunnels up there that housed the trains one time to allow them to go through the rock and the granite. 300 men actually laid down that track. And it took them 3 years, from 1836 to about 1839, to complete the construction of the tracks from Bridgeport all the way to Newtown. From there on, they decided they wanted to open up the track and bring it all the way to Pittsfield by 1840. So you can imagine a railroad going through the whole center of town. And people were very excited about riding it. As a matter of fact, in Trumbull, they had an amusement park that was built up by the Housatonic Railroad. And it was called Parlor Rock. And 3,000 people on the weekends would go there, and they would go swimming and boating. And they would play croquet, which was the big game in the 1800s. And they would have clam bakes, and they had a baseball diamond there with the Nichols team and the Bridgeport Bees. And it was no Yankee Stadium, but people really enjoyed this. And everyone just wanted to get out of the city, out of the smog at that time. So they would come out of church and just board the train in Bridgeport and actually dress up into Victorian garb. And the guys would dress up and, they would have their handlebar mustaches, and they would have suspenders on. And you know how we dress down when we go into the wooded areas? Well, they dressed up. And they had a toboggan slide in there that was 65 feet. And they would put water on it, and then it would freeze, and then they would slide down it. Now, this was fun back then to people. And they would board the train, and the Housatonic Railroad built this park in the Trumbull Valley to promote train travel. So it was a win-win situation for everybody. And also keep in mind that people from Massachusetts would come down into Parlor Rock as well. Now, Parlor Rock ran from 1878 to about maybe 1897. And the reason that it went out was because they didn't have any more beer. Believe it or not, the park ran dry. But I want to tell you something interesting about Parlor Rock. It had Thomas Edison's first generator in there to light the park up. And they had mills in there. The Tate's paper mill, which made book bindings, and they used the Pequannock River that runs through there to harness the power off the water, to make the water wheel turn, to make the pulleys turn in the factory. They also had a big mill in there called the Ratcliffe Shirt Mill, and they made shirts in there, and they also made canvas wristlets in there. It ran for 120 years. Finally burnt down to the ground in the late 1800s. So this was pre-electrification. And this is how This was the dawn of industry. It wasn't just woods in there. It was much more. Now, every May and every October, I take a bunch of cyclists, bicycle riders, that is, into the Trumbull Valley to show them the different historical points of interest that are in there. And people are amazed because I think that a lot of newcomers to the area thought that, it was just woods. And they start to see the remains of the mill, the remains of the Radcliffe Shirt Mill, the remains of the Tate factory. There's a cow tunnel in there, as a matter of fact, where Farmer Beardsley would bring his cows under the tracks through the tunnel so that they can drink from the reservoir. And we get people getting off the bicycles and actually walking through the tunnels and coming out the other side, thankfully. At any rate, there's so much history in there. And there's so much history going up the line. Stepney was just not some little town that people think it is. It was booming as far as, kind of a wealthy town. And Brookfield, Danbury. The train ran through Danbury, and it stopped off at the Danbury Railway station at the time. Now, Alfred Hitchcock filmed a movie called Strangers on a Train there, and it was made in 1953. And it was about a murder between two men that wanted to murder somebody that they were both close to. And Alfred Hitchcock used the Danbury station, which is now the Danbury Railway Museum, as one of his backdrops to the movie. And you kind of, if you saw the movie, you kind of see Alfred Hitchcock like boarding the train, with a cello. And everyone up there at that time in 1953 was so excited that a film was being made there. Now, eventually, the Danbury Railway station did go out of business, and then it turned into the Railway Museum. Now, if you want to see Housatonic Railroad history at its largest as far as artifacts, go to the Danbury Railway Museum, and you will see train cars up there, New Haven train cars, FL9s, Bud cars. This is all New Haven. New York, New Haven, and Hartford line. And some of Housatonic Railroad lanterns. It's a treasure trove of railroad history up there. They even had water towers up there. One, I believe, now. The railroad always had water towers going across it because the thing is that the trains needed water to move because they were steam locomotives. Now, I'm talking about the steam locomotives of the yesteryear with, the steam coming out, the top and all that. And then it turned into diesel electric by the 40s. It was a cleaner and faster mode of transportation. So if you do go up to Swamp Road in Newtown, you will see still the train does go from there to all the way to Canaan, Connecticut, and to Pittsfield. And it is a diesel electric. And the train follows now into the history pages, the Annals of History pages, from 1836 till now. The railroad still follows a continuous line. But now it's at a faster mode of transportation, particularly bullet trains that go up to like 200 miles an hour. But at any rate, just wanted to let you know that Beardsley Park had a train going through it, not through the park, but on the west banks. And it came up from Bridgeport. And I just wanted to let everyone know that this Sunday, June 7th, and I wanted to hold up the flyer, I am going to have a historic walking tour through Beardsley Park. And I'm going to show everyone the connections of the train and its role in industry, because there was a lot of mills there and there was a lot of ice houses there. And I'm going to show people what it was, what the park was, how the park came into fruition, what the park was like earlier when it first started. I'm going to show the railroad connections from North Avenue all the way to Quarry Road. I would like you to join me at the Beardsley Park Zoo entrance at 1 p.m. And we're going to be stopping off at many historical points of interest. I will be talking about the railroad, but I will also be talking about Beardsley Park. And a lot of people would get off the train into from a station called North Bridgeport, which was by the Park City Low Ford. There was a station there called North Bridgeport. A lot of people don't know this obscure piece of history. And they would go into Beardsley Park. And I'm just going to show you that it wasn't just a park. There was a lot of history in there. And it was formed by James Walker Beardsley. And the park was designed by Frederick Law Olmsted, who also designed Central Park, and much more. Now, in about 2009, I wanted to share this part of history from Bridgeport to Trumbull. So I made a video. It's called Rails to Trails, A Journey Back in Time. And from the years 1836 to 1940, a vibrant cluster of industry and social culture sprung up around the railroad that once ran through the towns of Bridgeport, Trumbull, Monroe, and Newtown, Connecticut. What happened to that railroad and everything that grew around it? Author and historian Sue DelBianco takes you on a fascinating visual journey back in time to answer that question. If you are interested in this video, please email me at DelBianco Sue, my last name and then my first, at Yahoo. That's DelBianco Sue at yahoo.com. It's a nice little golden nugget of railroad history in this area. And another thing I wanted to tell you is when I was talking about railroad wrecks, they had a big railroad wreck in the Trumbull Valley on September 30th, 1901. Two trains collided. A down freight was coming from Pittsfield. Engineer Holt was in charge. He was supposed to stop off at the Parlor Rock siding. He didn't. He kept going. I think he might have fallen asleep. The up freight came in up from Bridgeport, 5:40 a.m. Engineer Holt saw the car coming. In the nick of time, he jumped. And then, unfortunately so, he got blamed for this, like a lot of conductors and engineers would. They got blamed for this wreck. But it could have been a lot of things. The brakemen, they would run railroad workers maybe 14 or 15 hours a day. And a lot of them drank, and we think that maybe Engineer Holt fell asleep. And then at the nick of time, he just jumped. And unfortunately so, he lived, but he had his hand severed and cut off, amputated. As I said, there was a prize bull in there, very angry. He came from the Newtown Fair, which was then later the Danbury Fair, and now the Danbury Mall. Very angry bull. But at any rate, it was one of the worst railroad accidents in history, besides the Federal Express in 1911, going over Fairfield Avenue. So as I said, if you think railroad is dangerous today, you can only imagine the horrors, stories that went around railroad back then. There were numerous accidents and many deaths. But I just wanted to say that railroad is one of the biggest technological breakthroughs in America. And I'm proud to say that they took these abandoned railroad corridors. It's a part of a conservancy effort called Rails to Trails, and they made them into places where people can enjoy, walking and running and biking and just some relaxation. And I'm just so glad that if we didn't have the railroad, we would not have these trails today. So I would like to invite all of you to, my event on Sunday, this Sunday, June 7th. We meet at 1 o'clock at the Beardsley Zoo entrance. Parking is free, admission is free. I will have another bicycle tour in about mid-October, but I don't know the exact date, but that's to be announced in the newspapers and radio and perhaps television. And I just wanted to say that I'm very excited to be here today. My name is Sue DelBianco. Again, if you have any questions about this part of history, railroad history, please contact me at DelBianco Sue at yahoo.com. Have a wonderful day.